I'm Stumpy Nubs, and I'm going to show you how to sharpen a card scraper. Card scrapers are inexpensive, they're infinitely reusable, and they'll save you a ton of sanding if you take the time to learn to sharpen and use them correctly. Fortunately, we've got you covered. In the June issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, you'll find a video all about scraping techniques. I encourage you to check it out over in the archives at stumpynubs.com. But right now, I'm going to show you what I think is the best way to sharpen your scrapers so that you get a good, durable edge that will mean more time scraping and less time sharpening. A sharp scraper produces wispy thin shavings. If you're getting dust, it's time to sharpen. And the first step is to square the edge of your scraper with a mill file. This is a single cut fine file. You don't want to use a really coarse one because that will mean more work to clean up the marks left behind. It's a good idea to use a Sharpie to color your edges. That way you'll know when you've refreshed it down its entire length. Hold the file perpendicular to the edge of your scraper and take 4 or 5 light passes, or until all of the black ink is gone. I also like to use the file to round over my corners a bit so that they're not so sharp when I'm holding onto the scraper during use. Repeat this same process on the other side of the scraper. If you find it difficult to hold your file perpendicular to the edge freehand, you can purchase a jig like this one that's made from Veritas, or you can make one. This one here is simply a block of wood with a slot cut down its length that's just wide enough to slip my file inside. By holding it against the scraper, I can ensure that my file is perpendicular to its edge as I work. At this point, you'll feel a rough burr on the edge of your scraper. Some people will go right ahead and start scraping with this burr. The reason I don't recommend that is because a burr created with a file is rough and weak. Even if you appear to get good results at first, they're not going to last long. It's better to go through the proper sharpening steps and establish a proper hook, as you will see. However, while that burr may not be ideal for scraping, it is ideal for cutting flesh if you carelessly drag your hand across it. So treat it just as you would any other edge tool and work with care. As I said, a file may joint the edges quickly, but the surface left behind is still a little rough. So we're going to follow up with a diamond stone. This is a double-sided trend stone that I use for chisels and planes. One side is 300, the other is 1000. You can also use oil stones, water stones, even 220 and 600 grit sandpaper. To keep the card perpendicular to the stone as I work, I simply use a block of wood that I know is cut at 90 degrees, such as the one that I used for my filing jig. The block lays on the stone, and then I hold the card up against the side of the block. If you're using water stones, you'll also want to move around quite a bit as you work so that you're not wearing a kerf down the center of your stone. You can check the progress by letting the light catch the edge of the scraper. It shouldn't be very long before all of the marks left by the file are gone. You can then move on to the finer grit, but first wipe both the stone and the scraper and your wood block so you don't transfer any grit from one stone to the other. Now repeat the edge honing process on your finer stone. After you finish both edges of your scraper, you'll also need to polish the faces of the cards. But not the entire face. All that really matters is the 1/8 inch or so closest to your edges. So we're going to use the same ruler trick that many people use while sharpening plane irons, with a slight modification. Rather than placing the ruler on the stone, where it's going to slide around as we work, we hold the ruler against the scraper with our fingertips. And then we place it so that the ruler is touching the stone, and using our block of wood to apply some pressure to the edge, we work it back and forth across the surface of the stone. You don't have to press very hard, just enough to keep the scraper's edge flat on the stone as you work it. Do both sides of the scraper near both edges, beginning with the coarse stone, and then switch to the fine stone. These steps we've gone through may seem a little tedious, but they're important if you want a durable edge. As with any sharp tool, the cutting edge is the point where the two planes meet. In this case, it's the intersection between the narrow edge of the scraper and the face of the scraper. The more you polish those two surfaces, the longer it will stay sharp, because those scratches you remove would otherwise be potential weak points where the microscopic intersection will begin to come apart. So time spent with these steps will pay off in the end. The good news is you only have to do these steps every third or fourth sharpening, because the hook that we're about to form can be renewed without the file and stones. You'll see what I mean in a few minutes. Right now we have a square edge. We want to bend some of the metal over to make a hook along both sides of both edges. We do that by actually deforming the metal with a burnisher, which is made from a steel that is much harder than our scraper. Use a proper burnisher, not a screwdriver or other hand tool like a gouge. That may have worked in the old-timey days, but today's steel is much harder than it used to be, and your scraper's edge is going to be difficult to form without a burnisher. Before I actually form the hook though, I like to take a few seconds to draw out the steel. Lay your scraper flat on your bench top near its edge, and run your burnisher down the scraper's length, keeping it at a very slight angle and applying firm pressure. A few strokes on both sides of each scraper's edge is all it takes. Now you can mount the scraper in your vise and form your hook. Hold your burnisher at a slight angle. This angle isn't critical, but you do want to keep it consistent as you pass your burnisher all the way down the length of your tool. Again, we're applying firm pressure. Some people also like to draw the burnisher forward toward them as it goes across the edge. What we're doing is taking that metal we drew out from the edge and we're folding it over, creating a sharp hook all the way down the entire length of the scraper. The angle that you hold your burnisher at will determine how you will have to hold your scraper during use to cut the wood fibers. If your angle changes as you go down the length of the edge, the scraper won't work properly. So consistency is key. If you have difficulty doing that by hand, there are several jigs on the market for that as well. This one is also made by Veritas and it has a carbide burnisher inside. You only have to set the angle you want and pass it over the edge a few times. How many times? Well, the idea is to get a hook that you can feel by dragging your hand up the face of the scraper. You want to be able to just barely catch it with your fingernails. You'll repeat the process then on both sides of both edges of your scraper, giving you 4 hooks. When you can feel a hook on all of your edges, you're ready to put your scraper to work. When it starts to get dull, you don't necessarily have to go back through this whole process every time. You can come back and reform your hook with a couple of passes with the burnisher to draw the edge back out, then a couple of more to reform the hook. Of course, you can only do this so many times before the metal that you keep bending back and forth weakens and you'll lose your hook altogether. Then you'll have to start from the beginning with the file. But you will find that the more care you put into any of these sharpening steps, the longer your scraper will keep its edge and the less often you'll have to sharpen it at all. Of course, sharpening your scraper is just the first step. Using it properly is another. But don't worry, it's a lot easier than you may think. We'll show you some great techniques in our next video, which you'll also find in the June 2016 issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal over in the archives at stumpynubs.com. And we'll see you next time.